What's up, everybody? This is the Uncanny Omar, and today I have a very special guest. This is B. Clay Moore, or just Clay, right now. Clay.
Anything works.
Anything works. Okay, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well, thanks. How about yourself?
Doing good. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, big fan of your stuff, man. And right now you're trying to get this book put out in a hardcover format. And I have so many questions about this particular project that you're working on. You're working on it with Tony Harris,
Mm-hmm.
and so Dave McKeag is also on this.
Right, yeah, Dave colored it.
Okay, so yeah, I'm curious how all this got started. But first, tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do?
Well, I write comics. I've been writing comics, I guess. Like Hawaiian Dick #1 dropped like 20 years ago this month, which is crazy.
Well, that was over at Image, right?
Yeah, that was the first creator-owned book that I co-created or created and did on my own. Prior to that, I'd done there was an anthology that writer Jay Torres and I put together at Slave Labor Graphics in the late 90s and early 2000s, which was called Love in Tights. It was a romance superhero mashup, and a lot of different creators who went on to bigger and better things. Well, bigger things. Were involved in that, and that's kind of how I got my feet wet. And Hawaiian Dick was the first thing that I conceived on my own.
Okay.
Pitched that, found an artist to collaborate. We built it together. Did that at Image, the first series. Immediately, it was a critical success and did pretty well at the time in the marketplace. So it kind of put me on the map in a number of regards. It was optioned for a film by New Line Cinema. Got me in the door at Image to the point where I developed a relationship with those guys. Followed that up with a few other Image things. A book called Battle Hymn with Jeremy Hahn. Jason Latour and I did a book called The Expatriate. I did a few other things. Worked at Image for a year as their PR and marketing coordinator. Not long after that. And then from there, just sort of the past umpteen years have been freelancing at various, DC, Image, Oni, Top Cow, Valiant, Aftershock, just about. I mean, I've done fewer books at more publishers than anybody in the industry. I've got a Dark Horse book coming out next year with Mac Chater, which is the first kind of major project I've done with them. Otherwise, beyond that, I've just done a couple small things at Dark Horse. But generally what I've done is created, even doing work for hire, I've almost always created original concepts. For whatever reason, it's kind of the way it's worked out. The Whistling Skull, which we're talking about here, was a DC book.
That's the journey I want you to take me on.
Right. That was a creator-owned book that we added DC elements to, so it was kind of it's a weird animal. I mean, I honestly have not seen it done the way we did it before. It's not how we intended to do it.
It's really interesting, and I want to get in on that too. But before we do, I looked at everything, and I looked at your resume, which is you're right. You were all over the place. It's just wonderful. That's a good place to be, right? Like,
I mean, sometimes it would be nice to have a home for more than a series at a time. But I mean,
But I have to ask, what did you do at Viz?
Oh, Viz, I did two graphic novellas. One was a Ben 10 book.
Okay.
And one was a Max. What's the shit? I can't remember the character's name. It was a tie-in. Max. Gosh darn it!
All I got is Headroom right now.
No, it's not Max Headroom. That would have been cool. Geez, I mean, I don't know how long it's been. It's been a few years now. And one of I say one of the main reasons. It's not one of the main reasons I did it, but what was cool about doing that was it was the first kind of first two things I'd done that were sort of all ages oriented. It's just not my wheelhouse normally. But that was the one thing. Like, I remember going to my kids' Scholastic book fair in elementary school, where they sell all these different books, and finding copies of this book that I'd written there, which was, kind of like
Oh, that's
proof that
cool.
I'm not lying. Look, I did do this stuff, but
You should have started a line. Look, I'm here signing my
yeah,
book. If anybody wants to jump in.
yeah, I did.
Okay, so
I did those with an editor named Joel Enos, who's a great guy. It's funny that it's funny how interconnected everything is. That came about because so the Whistling Skulls with Tony Harris, who
mhm.
I don't know about most notably, but had done Starman in the '90s with James Robinson. Well, there you go. Yeah,
Starman's my jam. He's back there behind this. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's one of my favorite books of all time.
well,
And
that was for me like the most influential in terms of how I approach stuff. That was probably the most influential book that I'd come across. I remember it kept me reading comics like when I was in college and stuff. When the grim and gritty stuff was in vogue, which was fine. It just wasn't really there was so much of it at the time. Like everything was trying to mimic these crazy image books. And most of them
yeah,
failed. But Starman and a few other little odds and ends were just so different, And anyway, so James and Tony, of course, had created Starman. And so they were kind of, idols of mine in that regard. I mean, which is,
I love hearing this. Okay.
yeah. So what's funny is I actually had dinner in San Diego with James, and he was married to Jan Jones at the time, who had been Dan DiDio's assistant at DC. She had brought me into DC because she was a fan of Hawaiian Dick. James had responded immediately, like early in my career, to some really small things I'd done, which I realized later that James Robinson and I have real similar sensibilities, which is like at a certain point I stopped being, I appreciate that he enjoys my work, but I realized, well, he likes it more than most people do because we're on the same wavelength with stuff. So anyway, I had a dinner with them in San Diego and met Joel, who was at Viz, and that's how that thing came about. Yeah, so getting to be friends with James and working with Tony was, in an industry where it's real easy to be jaded and exhausted by, it's been cool to kind of form those relationships with guys that engaged me, kept me in comics, influenced me so tremendously. And it all leads one thing to another. So the Viz stuff actually came about because I'd gotten to know James and Jan. So
Okay. So how did this come about with the Whistling Skulls? So because those first appeared in it was JSA Classified, if I'm not mistaken, right?
no, I did it. So I did the first thing I did at DC was a Wildcat arc in JSA Classified.
That's what it was. Okay.
Which was a mistake probably because Dan and Jan had approached me about working for DC, and
okay.
Dan had said, hey, nobody's ever told the story about how Detective Bullock and Batman met. You kind of, you're into the detective stuff is in your wheelhouse, so you could do that. Or we need filler for JSA Classified. And of course, I said, oh, man, I love the JSA. I was like, I've always told myself I'd do JSA. So I did this Wildcat story, which I'm happy with. And at the time, it seemed like it was going to launch into its own book and everything. Ramon Perez was the artist. Who I had to convince, work hard to get DC to approve on the book. Dave McCaig, actually, the same colors, colored it. It was supposed to be a launch pad into its own series. Didn't work out that way. In retrospect, I probably should have told the Batman story. I mean, that's kind of where the money is, and I know Dan would have responded better to that. But anyway, I did that. I did a Superman arc. I did just various odds and ends, and then Tony Harris, out of the blue, I don't think we'd even met at that point, sent me a message via Twitter or some social media and asked if I wanted to co-create a book that at the time was called The Further Adventures of the Whistling Skull and Brickfist. Like that was the message. And I said, yeah. I mean, for A, Tony Harris, B, he was working on Ex Machina at the time with Brian K. Vaughan, but they were wrapping that up. And I was like, I mean, A, I would kill to work with Tony, and B, that just sounds crazy enough to be something that I, want to be involved with. So we immediately connected and started kicking it around, and knew right off the bat that we probably wanted to try to do it at Wildstorm, which was a DC.
Yeah,
that's where Ex Machina was a Wildstorm book. I'm pretty sure. And so at the time, for people who don't know, Wildstorm had been Jim Lee's Image studio. McFarlane has Todd McFarlane Productions. Top Cow is Mark Silvestri's. Shadowline is Jim Valentino's. Since Robert Kirkman became a partner, Skybound is his studio. And Jim spun it off because the thing about Image is you own everything you do. You can do whatever you want to with it. Image owns nothing. So Jim took that, made a deal with DC, became a branch of DC. And so Wildstorm was on the West Coast when the rest of DC was still on the East Coast. And Tony had a relationship with Ben Abernathy, who is now like the, I don't know, executive editor of DC, but he had edited Ex Machina, and that was who we wanted to pitch it to. Hank Canals was the vice president at the time, who had been with Wildstorm since the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And he just had
he's a good guy. He was my contact at DC for a long time.
Hank's a great guy. Hank, he's not at DC anymore. He's got his own publishing imprint now. But what I always say about Hank is the one guy, the guy at DC that would always be completely honest with me about anything, because it's really hard to get honest feedback, or you get lost in the shuffle, and nobody wants to tell you bad news. Nobody wants to tell you good news. And Hank would always, sometimes depressingly so, but Hank would just always be completely honest about everything. He's a great guy. And Ben is a great guy too. Ben is one of the best editors I've ever worked with. So anyway, we pitched it as that, changed Brickfist to Knuckles, character name. It was a pulp noir. It's the Whistling Skull is a generational hero. So like this is number whatever in a line of Whistling Skulls. So the idea was we would tell the story of this particular Whistling Skull from the beginning of his career to the end of his career. And Wildstorm proved it, but Tony was busy wrapping up Ex Machina, so they kind of pushed the publishing date out a little bit.
Okay.
In fact, in the meantime, I did a book at Wildstorm called Casey Blue Beyond Tomorrow, which was an original concept that Wildstorm, it was work for hire that I created, because Ben was like, well, do you want to do something else while we're waiting for this? And he had some ideas. And
that was with Carlo Barbetti, right?
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
I like his artwork.
Yeah, he's great. That's not who I would have. That's not the book I would have had Carlo do. But he's a great guy, and he's a phenomenal artist. So I mean, I can't complain about it. But yeah, and actually, the way that, as I found out later, the reason Tony approached me about it is because he had first approached Robert Kirkman, who was kind of at the time climbing with The Walking Dead. It wasn't a TV show yet, but it was already a publishing phenomenon. I mean, when I was at Image, I used to try to explain to people who didn't understand that if he was selling like 20,000 copies 10 times a year of The Whistling Skull, or not The Whistling Skull, of The Walking Dead, and then also selling thousands of trades, he was making more money than anybody else, anybody working at DC or Marvel was, because of the way Image was structured. So like prior to that becoming a TV show, it was just a phenomenal cash cow, huge success in terms of the marketplace. And then, of course, when it became a TV show, it just, went into the stratosphere. But Tony had approached, because this is how Tony does things. He's like, oh, that guy's hugely successful and doing really well. Let's see if he wants to do this thing with me. And this kind of project, first of all, Robert was obviously, he was doing Invincible and Walking Dead and whatever. So he was busy, but this is not a project that's really in his wheelhouse. He's not really a pulp, he's not a pop culture. I don't know how to describe it. He's more, most of his sensibilities started in the 90s. You know what I mean? I mean, he's more, and he's much broader now in terms of what he does than he was at the time. But I think he knew that wasn't up his alley. And so he actually told Tony to get a hold of me and see if I'd be interested in doing it, because I had done things from various periods before. And, so we got that approved in 2007.
While this is still that period when Wildstorm was its own little
right.
And I don't want to say little, because there were a lot of characters and a lot of books being printed. I mean, that's where Sleeper, it's where Sleeper was, and
Planetary and the Authority.
Yeah.
I mean, that was.
Well, there were some big guns over there, but then eventually everything got absorbed by DC.
Right. And actually, to be honest about it, what Warren Ellis was doing on the Authority and Planetary, specifically the Authority, Stormwatch, and then the Authority was as influential on what I was doing as anything too. I mean, I just like, for having been reading comics since I was a kid, reading that stuff just kind of opened my eyes on how you could do things differently in genre, in superhero books, and not.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Without, I mean, Alan Moore's always been great at that too, but without dumbing stuff down, but still retaining what was fun and exciting about, and silly, but, cool about superhero comics without making fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
So with all that in mind, Wildstorm, it was kind of cool to be involved. But they were kind of, at the time, sort of floundering around a little bit. They were doing some creator-owned books. They had more approved that they hadn't done yet. The Wildstorm universe was a mess because they had tried to, they had handed it to Grant Morrison at one point, and then he didn't follow through with it. I mean, to be honest.
They did one issue of Wildcats. I remember that.
Right, yeah. Yeah, and the problem, and maybe this is telling tales, but it's been a long time, but the problem was they had kind of suspended and this has happened to them more than once, where they sort of suspend everything, don't make any plans because they're relying on this Grant Morrison project to be the center of everything. And then when it doesn't happen, they're just kind of out of luck. So anyway, yeah, to your point, Wildstorm then was absorbed into DC. So all the Wildstorm projects were either canceled or were going to be moved to DC.
Mm-hmm.
And this would have been maybe 2010, 2011, probably 2011. Yeah. So I'd already written all 6 issues of this first miniseries without any of the JSA characters. And Tony said, hey, we knew that we were going to get moved to DC because they had invested a lot of effort into time and money into the book already. But Tony had said, hey, I'm going to see if they'll let us incorporate these JSA Elseworlds characters that he had created years earlier in the Liberty Files. So he and Dan Jolly had done, I think, 2 different series. I think they were prestige format, the thick, called JSA The Liberty Files, about an Elseworlds version of the Justice Society, which I had read because beyond being a fan of the creators, I grew up as a Justice Society. It's like when I discovered the Justice Society, because I didn't know who any of these crazy characters were, I really got invested in figuring out who they were. So they were always favorites of mine. So he said, hey, I'm going to see if DC will let us incorporate those characters into the Whistling Skull.
And even though it was Wildstorm, or was it?
Even though it wasn't, it was Wildstorm, but it was creator, but it was so like the way that most Vertigo Wildstorm creator-owned books would work is that DC, they basically lease the material for a certain amount of time, say. Mm-hmm. So they own it as long as certain criteria are met, like as long as they keep publishing it or keep it in print or what have you. And they also have like the media rights. But then if certain things happen, there's the opportunity for the rights to revert back to you. So you'll see, if you look around, you'll see like Image will be reprinting books that were originally maybe Wildstorm or Vertigo books.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Some of them are now like DC.
Or IDW maybe, or whomever.
Yeah, the same thing happened to, I was thinking of Mark Waid. Mark Waid's Empire.
Yes.
Empire had, I think, my gosh, it went IDW. Now it's published by another company. So yeah, I can see that. Man.
Right. And that's, in all honesty, unless you're working at Image where you own everything all the time and can always do whatever you want with it, Image doesn't have any control. They don't make any extra money on it. Almost every other publisher, there are some criteria that you kind of, you'll trade a page rate for them to have co-ownership, or they'll own the media rights for a certain amount of time. So that's always a consideration when you create something, is how you can get the rights back, right? So it was always in the back of my mind that at some point we might get the rights to the Whistling Skull, although we wanted to do it at DC for a long time. And I thought, well, there's no way they're going to let us add DC characters to this thing, because then if that ever happens, and then they did. And I mean, and again, that's just kind of like, I wouldn't even ask them if I was like, man, I'd love to do this, because I would think, but Tony's like kind of like a bull in a china shop, he's like, let's just, and that's how he works creatively too, which is what I kind of enjoy about working with him, is the crazy shit that he throws at the fan.
And sometimes it sticks though, and sometimes
absolutely. Well, and
so your idea originally with him was not to have any of these JSA characters, and then it came back that they were like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So then I had to rewrite all 6 issues with the incorporating, and it actually worked to our advantage in the long term because since I had already written the story and kind of done what I wanted to do in terms of introducing the characters and the universe and the aesthetic, I couldn't, like, it wasn't going to be rewritten with them as major players all throughout the series. So they kind of worked more as a framework, and then also as a way throughout the book to kind of flesh out the larger world, kind of using ideas we already had in mind, but this gave us a way to tie it into something that was already sort of established, the 52 and all this. So then the first cover was redrawn. I don't have the trade. I wish I had a copy of it. The first cover was redrawn with the Hour Man, Wildcat, and Dr. Midnight doppelgangers, which is the clock, the hour, and the cat on the front cover with the whistling skull. So it was very clearly that. They retitled it, which is still the most awkward title I've ever. I mean, I still have to look at it to remember. It's JSA Liberty Files: The Whistling Skull. I mean, it's kind of a
long title.
It's a little. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but you know, we were happy, and then through circumstances that don't really have anything to do with the book, the first 6 issues were the only 6 issues we didn't get to do the follow-up series we had in mind.
Okay.
And a lot of that, having been really involved with DC stuff at the time, there was a whole lot of try this, try that, New 52, you know. I mean, they were really just kind of cycling through ideas for new eras and launches and this and that at the time. So it was not maybe not the most ideal time to try to establish this at DC proper. But it was well received, and and then a couple, maybe a year and a half ago or a year ago, we realized that the conditions were in place for us to regain the rights. And Tony and I just sent an email out to DC, and because his attorney had become involved, which is not, I don't usually like in terms of the original contract, he had actually made it much easier for us to get the rights back than it might have otherwise been. Which at the time I was just quit messing around. I just want to do this book. You know, don't make DC mad. And you know, in the long run, he did us. Don't be afraid of having lawyers look at your contracts, I guess is what I should say. I just comics is such a weird business. I tend to fly by the seat of my pants. But that's a long-winded explanation. So that's where we are.
To go back to that point, though, I think this is one of those places where you want your lawyer to look at contracts.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I just at the time,
I think it is. You know, it's. I mean, oh my gosh, how many horror stories have we heard about nothing? You know, $1 billion movies and
and that's actually that's a whole different conversation. Because
absolutely,
comic book contracts are what they are. I mean, it's a complicated. It's a thing we discuss all the time, like among creators and stuff, especially guys who are doing a lot of creator-owned work. You know, and some of us just sort of sign things and cross our fingers, and some guys, I mean, won't do a thing unless, you know, they have everything. You know, anyway, that's a whole different topic.
I would love to talk about these things, honestly.
Yeah,
that's the kind of stuff that I find really interesting because of everything that has happened. And, you know, you have creators and then you have fans that are kind of left out. They're kind of like, oh, well, that sucks. They can't use this character but let's go back to this. So with DC saying, yeah, you guys can have your rights back. And the stipulations, I assume, are like, but you can't use Hour Man, you can't use Wildcat in your story. So you were like, okay, well, and then I have to read. That means Tony would have to redraw it. You would have to rewrite it. Is that how this works?
Yeah. It turned out to be a little easier process than I think we first thought it would. Like, I haven't really revisited the book for a long time, and I went back and reread it, and first of all, was just blown away again by I think what Tony and Dave McCaig on the color did in the art is just phenomenal. It's so perfect for this book. It's expressive, and it's so Tony, like on Ex Machina, Tony worked in more of a photorealistic sort of photo reference style, right? Everything,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's still clearly Tony, but it's more grounded in real world visuals. With
well, the visuals that they sent me, it looks. I didn't even recognize it was him until I started looking at some of the art. He just looks like he's having fun.
Well, yeah, exactly. He just drew the hell out of it. I mean, it's you know, he wasn't afraid to just go to town, you know, exaggerating stuff and be more stylistic and really fitting the tone, the sort of the proper term is weird, but more of like the old sense. Like weird was a word that used to be more in vogue in terms of like describing almost a genre, you know, just kind of creepy, you know, shadowy, noirish, pulpy imagery. And he really went to town on the weird aspects of things, which you can see if you go to the page where Zoop has their campaign, or just even, you know, poke around for images, you can see the character creation and stuff is almost over the top, but it's still it's unsettling, you know, but it's not gross. It's just unsettling and weird. And then Dave, as I said, the colorist, he really understood what we wanted to do. And Dave colored the original series, and then he actually went back, and I never had a problem with the way the book was printed, but and I can understand where they're coming from. They both thought it was a little darker than they wanted it to be. So Dave went back and sort of just adjusted the color across the board so that it would print more as everybody kind of sees it in their head. And we did go back and we tweaked what's funny about the characters we had used originally were characters that Tony had created based on DC characters. So now what we were doing is kind of recreating those characters based on characters Tony had created based on characters. So it's kind of a, you know, and all those characters are really tropes anyway. I mean, there are very few Golden Age characters that don't have several other characters that are very similar, you know. I mean, everybody was kind of feeding off of each other at the time. Like Wildcat, there were tons of Catmans. I mean, literally called Catmans from different publishers, and, you know, and the Black Cat, and, you know, and so Wildcat, and so we just kind of tweaked that. I reset kind of the larger universal stuff that we had kind of tied into DC. I sort of pulled out and restructured a little, so that throughout the series, as it's referenced, it's kind of introducing a slightly newer world for this character, and you know, and it gives us the opportunity to go from here and do more with the character down the road, maybe as we originally intended, and because we own it all, you know, we can do whatever we want with the material. So, and this book, actually, this book, Zoop, I guess Zoop had been talking to Tony about something, maybe something else. And he asked me how I'd like to do this in like a deluxe hardcover edition. And I said,
yeah, what made that decision? What made you say, okay, let's not do a trade paperback, let's do a hardcover, deluxe?
Well, Tony wanted to see it in the best format possible. You know, he wanted to see a really well produced, nice looking hardcover with a little extra material and stuff. So, you know, something to, I mean, just basically that, you know, put it in the best format available. And so, and I was completely down for that. You know, when we got the rights back, it was always a question of what to do with them. I mean, we knew that we probably wouldn't do a new story without having tweaked the existing story. But yeah, he asked me what I thought of that. And Zoop does everything. I mean, technically they're crowdfunding, but if you want to be honest about it, the entire direct market is the same thing. I mean, you know, people present a book, people pre-order it, and then orders are filled based on what people pre-order, right? So since Zoop was going to take the reins and run the campaign, fulfill everything, see to the printing, I mean, I was completely on board with that.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that, because I do want to have Jordan on one day, but I was curious, like what is the difference between Zoop, between why go with Zoop and not like Indiegogo or Kickstarter, like why go this route?
Well, so Tony and I had, I've got a Hawaiian Dick Kickstarter that's way, way late because I had way too many moving pieces involved.
Okay.
I mean, like over a dozen creators. I mean, it's been a nightmare trying to get that put together. And I knew I wasn't going to do another solo crowdfunding project until I got that done. I'd originally done this book I'd done with Jeremy Hahn, Alex Cretion, and Seth Peck. We'd kickstarted that in about 2012, 2013. And it was a 200-page hardcover with multiple creators involved. And somehow we pulled all that together and we're only marginally late on it.
Okay.
I don't know how we did that, but I would not. I mean, there's so much heavy lifting involved and so much cat wrangling involved in doing anything like this that I knew we weren't going to ever take this out on our own, even if he has a crowdfunding thing of his own that he's finishing up now called Round Eye that he's actually found a publisher for and everything's going to be taken care of. But it was such a painful process for both of us to get these things done on our own that I don't think either of us thought we would try to. I mean, and it's not neither of us are going to do this and do it well.
Okay.
So, I mean, let's just put it that way. So, and when Zoop first appeared, I will be honest, I was kind of like, well, why would you give somebody a cut of the money you're making, and trust them to do all this? And then I realized, well, shoot, it's not about profit margin. It's about being able to get the book produced with somebody else really taking the reins and doing all the hard work involved. I mean, beyond us just trying to promote it, get the word out, and actually finish the book, which was not a problem because most of it was already done.
Somebody else is doing, I don't want to say the heavy lifting because you're still creating the book. Somebody else is in charge of production and making sure the shipping is right and quality, quality control and things like that. So kind of,
well, I mean, basically we're still, it's kind of like, it's closer to like if you're doing a book at Image where you do all the work. I mean, Image more than Zoop, they do have people on hand that can help you with production aspects. But most Image books I've done, even like the last two Hawaiian Dick trades I did, I put those together by myself. I mean, I took all the existing material. I put together the book and sent them the print files ready to go. Right. That's kind of what it is.
That's really hands-on.
It is, but I mean, luckily like I said, luckily I had all the material pretty much print ready. It's another story, but since Image had published the books originally, they could also give me back the print files, and then I sort of could reassemble the print files, add new files. I mean, it's not, if you can use Photoshop and Illustrator, you can at least produce something passable if you have any creative acumen, which some publishers don't seem to have. But with Zoop, we give them the book as we want it to be published, and then they do take care of the printing and the shipping and all that, and the fulfillment and everything, as well as hosting the campaign and keeping track of it and collecting funds and all that stuff and everything. So I've realized in that regard, it's a really nice alternative to other crowdfunding options, even if for the time being, maybe you're cutting yourself, maybe you're costing yourself a few dollars here or there because you're sharing the profit. But I don't even know that that's true, because you've got to figure, in crowdfunding, you've got to calculate on your own, what you're spending and what you're making, and trying to figure out pricing on things. And, more than one campaign has cost people. I mean, the Hawaiian Dick campaign is going to cost me more money than I made on it just to get it done, but I have to get it, I have to finish it and get it out. So what I will say is, having done this book through them, I've realized I now have in mind some things that they might be best suited to handle. Maybe collecting some other things that I have that are out of print that are creator owned that we want to tweak and or maybe an anthology, something again where there are a lot of moving pieces, and if I can just kind of get people involved and then let Zoop handle all the other elements. I think it's a good option. And if you go to the website, you'll see they handle a variety of projects in terms of the size, what people need them to do. And you still have to go through the process, and they have to approve you, and like in anything else. I mean, they're basically a publisher that crowdfunds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we still own everything we're doing. We still make all the decisions when it comes to how, they consult with us, but we make the decisions in terms of the format and the, they're not going to price things or add anything on without consulting and talking to us first. So it's very much a collaborative process. And I'm really impressed with how well they juggle all this, considering they're doing multiple projects at the same time. So I'm impressed that they kind of launched this, and not only launched it, but seem to have succeeded with it and are growing instead of launching it and then failing and having somebody else pick up the ball. That's how it works a lot of the time is somebody comes up with an idea, it doesn't quite work out, and somebody else modifies it, but they seem to have figured it out and are moving forward and upward with what they're doing. So I definitely recommend it. I mean, I've talked to, now I've got friends in the industry who are creators who have figured out like Ryan Brown is a great example, who have figured out crowdfunding where they don't really, it would be to their detriment to take things to publishers because they succeed so much better on their own through crowdfunding. They figured out different fulfillment methods and how they can get stuff shipped and everything. There are a lot of creators that would have no problem at all getting their books picked up by various publishers, but have just figured out the way to make it work through crowdfunding and end up doing much better on their own with more control of what they do that way. So,
okay. So that leads to a question I've wondered about with the crowdfunding and when you were talking about Image. So I've had several creators on before, and because I do collected editions on my channel, that's what I focus on, and that's what I'm doing, which is great. How much control as a creator do you have somewhere at Image? Whereas opposed to like DC, I assume they're like, hey, we're gonna make a trade paperback, and if you got the files. But at Image, do you, as the creator, go, yeah, let's make that a hardcover, or no, let's start it as a soft cover? Like, how does that work over there, as opposed to like crowdfunding? You're like, hey, we're gonna make a hardcover.
Image isn't going to publish something that is unlikely to make the money back that is spent on it. But they also are never going to do anything without, they may suggest something to you, but they don't have the permission to do anything without your say so, because again, creators own everything. And sometimes as a creator, you've also got to kind of keep in mind, Image may you may have an idea, and Image may think it'll break even and do all right, but then you've got to kind of keep in mind yourself, am I really maximizing the potential of, what do I want? Do I just want to break even on a hardcover that's beautiful that I can then keep so many copies of my own and then hand sell myself in a shop? Like some people will overprint, you're paying for that, but they'll keep a reserve so that they can sell them themselves through conventions or online or what have you. It's up to the creator, but it's more up to the creator to ask Image if they think it's something that is viable, put it that way. So you rarely see hardcover collections of books that failed at Image, because Image isn't making extra money. They are losing money if your book doesn't make back the costs that are involved, right? So that's always on your ledger, and then once the book turns a profit, then you're just making profit on top of profit. That's why a book like the original the first Walking Dead trade, you can go back to the 15 years or whatever that's been in print. You can see every single month it would be in the top 10 trades sold, right? So 1,000, 1,100, 1,500, 2,000, you know, the money that one book has generated over 15 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars easily, you know. So that's the thing about Image. I mean, what do you want out of it? I mean, you're going to have to put in some work. But if you can make it work, you can be tremendously successful while owning everything you do, owning all the media rights. That was the key with Hawaiian Dick, is that when it came out, it was well received. But you know, we got a healthy film option a year after it came out, which was then renewed. That's money you don't count on when you're doing this, what you think is kind of a niche book, but suddenly when you figure out the page rate, you might as well add all that stuff in, and you realize how much money you really made on 3 issues or 7 issues or whatever. So, you know, I haven't done much in Image for a while. But there are factors involved in deciding where you're going to take, like the last creator-owned thing I did was at Aftershock last year. I did a book called Miles to Go with Stephen Molnar. And, you know, again, it was like, what do we want out of this book? Do we want to make enough money to justify doing it? Do we want to do it on spec and publish it somewhere where we just make money on the back end? Do we want to own all the rights? Do we want to trade a page rate for giving up half the rights? All that, you know, do we want to have somebody else handle all the production? Which was one reason we did go to Aftershock. You know, they handled all the lettering and the production, and you know, and we made money on the book up front. So, you know, there's just all kinds of different criteria involved. Like I mentioned, we're doing a book at Dark Horse next year. Mac Chater and I are. It's kind of a horror thing, and one of our considerations was the profile that Dark Horse has. They do a lot of stuff that doesn't work, but every shop seems to order something from Dark Horse, one thing or another. So you kind of hope, well, maybe we can kind of draft on, you know, catch fire. And since they're ordering the new Hellboy or, you know, whatever licensed book they have coming out, you know, maybe we can convince them to order a few copies of this. You know what I mean? So that's a book like we're trying to build success with. And we thought that was a company that gave us a good chance of doing so. Yeah, it varies, and once you get into the industry, once you do something, creators are more than willing to share what they know, and you know what companies work different ways. You know what contracts are favorable, who pays, who doesn't. I mean, all kinds of things. So
contracts. So tell me about the Zoop then. Like, what is the Zoop Presents, the Whistling Skull Special Edition hardcover? What's going to be in here that has never been collected before?
Well, it's everything's been tweaked, kind of remixed to establish this unique universe. We dug up some. Tony does a lot of I don't even know how to describe it. I mean, he actually has, and he's building a new one, I guess, but he has like a physical costume of the Whistling Skull that has the whole thing that he would use for models set up to kind of figure out what he was going to do and base stuff on. I mean, so there's all these sketches and prep work that we've done that we hadn't really included in the book. There are a few little odds and ends that I kind of dug up. I don't delete any Gmail, so I can. It's like my greatest regret is that when I was working in Image and doing the original Hawaiian Dick stuff, I was on AOL, because my email only goes back to 2006, and there's stuff that's lost forever that, which is kind of crazy, I guess. But yeah, I could literally like go back and just in email, I have like these original pitches and sketches and stuff like this that we hadn't collected initially. So we'll do that, and we have signed editions. Tony designed a new frontispiece and some new some pages. He did like he just did some design work for the back section and for the frontispiece. So we have signed copies. He has he's remarking some. He's doing little sketches in some copies. He's also offering full sketches, which people should go look at the Zoop page. There's about 10 days left in it at this point. And I think there's some things that people haven't really taken advantage of that are available there too. But yeah, at this point, I mean, it's the campaign is successful, so we know that the book will be published. There are stretch goals we've added, like to increase the size of the book, or the Zoop added really. And we'd like to do that just again to kind of make sure the book is everything it could be. And it's all, like I said, it's all done. So it's really, I'm probably not as active as I should be in kind of getting people's attention with it. Partly because I'm like, well, I've done my job, we just kind of need to.
You wrote it, and it's funded. So.
All I really need to do is just, email, upload the finished print files that I've got, and it's ready to go. But yeah, go to the Zoop page, which is like zoop.gg/c/whistling skull. But Google Zoop Whistling Skull. If you got, there it is. It's up there. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I also have it in the description of the video. If anybody wants to put it in the comment section right now.
Yeah, just check it out. I mean, there's and I've been posting to some degree, like on Twitter and a little bit on Instagram and actually Hive a little bit. I've tried, but Hive keeps crashing on me. It's just a better place to present graphics. But I've been posting some images and stuff from the book and some of the. One of the stretch things is so Tony's got the original art, like the black and white sort of comps that he did, which are really beautiful on their own. So he's going to put together like a 22-page book of just comp pages as he originally designed them that we'll send out to people. That's pretty cool. When we first did this book, in fact, I had a couple artists that I was showing people Tony's black and white pages, and a couple artists were like, "Are you guys going to do just a black and white version without any of your dialogue or words on it or anything, just so I can look at the art?" And so this is close to that. As a writer, you love hearing guys say, "Hey, can I get one of these without any of your scribbling on it?" But, so yeah, that's one of the things that is offered up there, I think.
Yeah, that's I was looking at the head sketches that he's offering. Those are nice.
They're great. They're really artist. Yeah, he's
artist.
He's good. And we've actually, it's funny too, because this project is kind of, there's a thing that we were working on shortly after this that got derailed by whatever, called Buffalo Monk. And he's now kind of re-energized and keeps asking me to, dig back into that. So I don't know what we would do with it, but it's a bonkers, zany Western concept that, again, some basic ideas he came up with that were just nuts. I mean, like crazy, that I was fully on board with, and we kind of fleshed it out from there. And we don't have any concrete plans for it yet, but I think it's probably something we'll try to dig into next and see what we can do with it. So,
let's see here. There's a couple questions that I'm curious about. How do writers keep up with the history of characters in order to create new stories that don't repeat?
That's a good question. That's my opinion. If you're doing that with work for hire, like with DC or Marvel characters, and I have more experience. I did a couple Marvel things, but I've done.
You did Stingray with Lee Weeks. I remember that.
Yeah, that's funny. My editor Warren Simons. I remember he emailed me and he goes, "Hey, do you know who Lee Weeks is?" And I was like, "Yes, I know who Lee's like."
Artist.
Is he okay if you? I'm like, there's no way I thought Lee Weeks would do this Stingray story, but and I met Lee later. He's also a super good guy, and talked to him about it a little bit, and even had somebody come to a convention. And they had some of the original art from the story that he had done.
What? That's awesome.
I know that Wildcat story I did with Ramon Perez, before the book was finished, somebody came to my table they had bought some of the original art he had done. And I'm like, it's fun. And actually, also I did a book at Valiant called Savage that I created with Louis LaRosa. And Louis is just an amazing, astonishing artist. And same thing, like before the book had even hit the stands, a guy came up to a convention and he had bought like 2 of the covers, like he buys all Louis's stuff. And I'm like, wow. But yeah, so the question, I think it's more that's an editorial concern more than anything. And that happened to me. It's funny that I did the second thing I did at DC years ago was a Superman confident. What was it? JSA? Was it JSA Confidential Superman? No, JSA Classified Superman Confidential.
It was Superman Confidential.
Right. So I did a Superman Confidential story, which appealed to me because it was kind of out of continuity. But
yeah, it can take place anytime.
Right. But I don't know why I did. It's crazy to me in retrospect. It didn't even occur to me at the time, but the story tells kind of the origin of Jimmy Olsen's Signal Watch, which obviously that story had been told before. I mean, but for whatever reason, I never thought about it. And then it was Phil Hester and Andy Parks did the art. I mean, it's a cool story, but like sometime after that, I think I saw somebody online was like, well, wait a minute. This is how Kurt Busiek had just told the story about the Signal Watch or whatever, to the point where I was like, well, why wouldn't my editor? And I actually ran into Kurt at a convention and I was like, hey, I told this story and I guess, I'm sorry. He was like, and he said, that's up to editors to figure that. You're not supposed to know it is tough more and more. It's one of the reasons that work for hire isn't I'm not like always killing myself to pursue more work for hire unless it's, like I did a Batman thing with Ben Templesmith. It was digital first, and the appeal for it was that it was out of continuity. I didn't have to worry about tying into whatever was going on in the Batverse at the time. So, and maybe that's part of the appeal of even at Valiant. The two series I did at Valiant were both original creations based in the Valiant universe. You just kind of have to make sure you're not violating any of the rules that are in place, or if you do use a character that exists, it's not completely out of character with what's been going on. But it can get really like Marvel right now. I can't imagine how people keep track of some of that stuff. Friends of mine who do stuff in Marvel, I'm just, whatever new Avengers book with 40 different characters unrelated to the Avengers pop, it's like, how do you even, I don't even know. It's
well, I think about that because of like right now it's Jason Aaron writing Avengers.
Sure. Yeah, and Jason's a local. He's a friend. He's a local guy.
He's a great guy. I've interviewed him.
Times. No, he's a great guy.
Actually, dude, I'll be honest with you. Interviewing, since you know him was the first time was such a surprise because his characters are so over the top, and he looks like
he's like a slow-moving mountain.
That is such a good way to describe him. He was so just laid back and.
Well, it's funny. So Jason, I was at Image when Jason was trying to break into comics, and this is kind of how everything is all weirdly interconnected. So Jason's first comic work, he had won a contest. Where Marvel had put out a call for
Wolverine, right?
Right. So what had happened was he won the Wolverine story, and then another guy who's a friend of mine in California had submitted a story that Marvel said wasn't going to win, but they wanted to publish it anyway. And
oh wow!
And I didn't know Jason yet, but I knew him. And then literally at my comic shop, which is Elite Comics in Overland Park, which is where most of us go, somebody was like, "Hey, this is Jason Aaron. He won this Wolverine contest. He's trying to get into comics. He was working in a porn factory or something." And I had just started doing stuff, so we kind of got to know each other. But then when I was at Image, he sent me what became The Other Side, which was the first thing he had done at DC. Is a Vietnam era miniseries that he did with Cameron Stewart. But he had sent me the script for the first issue and had a different artist attached. And I read it and was just blown away. And so I went to Eric Stevenson and I was like, this guy I know, Jason Aaron, he's written this. It's fantastic. I think we should do this book. And I emailed him and I was like, hey, Jason, I think we want to do this. And he said, oh, I'm doing that at Vertigo. And I was like, what do you mean? Why are you doing it at Vertigo? He's like, oh, I sent it to Will Dennis, who was the Vertigo editor, out of the blue. And he happened to read it and approve it, which that doesn't happen.
That's so quick. Wow, he must have caught him on a good day.
Yeah, so it's one of those like breaking into, like we do breaking into comics panels here, and I'd be like, just this isn't how it happens, but this is how it happened for Jason. And then Cameron drew it, who I had known for a while because he's a Toronto guy, and so yeah, from there it was like, I mean, It was crazy. He did that, and then he did Scalped, which I think is a masterpiece.
Yeah, because he did that over at Vertigo.
Yeah,
and then he started doing things at Image, like.
Well, he did that after the fact, but so he did The Other Side and Scalped at Vertigo, and I was starting to do DC mainstream DC stuff, and Tony Moore was drawing The Exterminators at Vertigo, and I thought Tony was a freaking genius. And I remember talking to my editor. Tony was living here too at the time, and I was like, hey, you should approach Jason Aaron about doing mainstream DC stuff. I'm like, this guy is just phenomenal. I mean, I just knew, like, he was just one of those guys right away. I was just like, this, I think it was Scalp that did it, but I was like, this guy's definitely going to be big time. And I recommended Tony, and he said to me, oh, we don't hire Vertigo guys. He said, if those guys want to do DC work, they need to go to Marvel and establish themselves there, and then they can do And I was like,
oh my gosh, I think that is the pattern, isn't it? I never thought about it.
It was, until Jason went to Marvel and became Marvel's biggest guy. And now you'll notice, like, Jeff Lemire and all these guys started coming in from Vertigo. And I'm 100% convinced somebody finally at DC was like, why are these Vertigo guys going over to Marvel? But I mean, I
didn't think about that until you said
that. whatever floor Vertigo was on, like, say Vertigo was on the 16th floor. The term my editor used was, oh, we don't hire guys from the 16th floor. And I'm like, they're doing DC books. I mean, it was crazy. So anyway, I tried. And I also, Matt Fraction was in town too. And I remember talking to Matt Fraction, and I was like, I said, hey, he was asking me about writing Superman. Like, oh, was it exciting to write Superman? And I was like, I remember saying, hey, they're looking for stories, you know, I could recommend you or whatever. And he's like, nah, I'm fine. And like a week later, he's writing, like, 10 Marvel, huge Marvel books or whatever. So I really tried to get DC to pay attention to those guys. But
well, and then eventually, I think he did do that Jimmy Olsen series.
Oh yeah, which is fantastic, by the way. He and Steve Lieber, it's great. Yeah. See, Matt's in a great place because I think Matt is a great writer, and he doesn't need to do comics. I mean, he's successful on his own terms. He can always do his creator-owned comics wherever he wants to. So I give DC a lot of credit for letting him, do their spin. That's the one thing I used to ask Matt all the time when he was at Marvel, is that he would do these, and now like Tom King gets to do this, but he would do these off the wall, kind of seemingly unmarketable books that did well, and
which is what Tom King does now.
Exactly. And I would be like, how do you even have the balls to pitch that stuff? Because I mean, that's what I was always like, that's what I want to do, but
because it always felt like continuity, like what these folks were saying in the chat.
Yeah.
Continuity was so important that you were bogged down by it, so you couldn't do a story 10 years. Well, I don't even know.
Also, it's
50 years ago with a vision like Tom King did, or Mr. Miracle.
It's just out of character for the big two to let somebody play so freeform with their characters. And it's funny because when Fraction did Hawkeye, which I think is phenomenal and really set the tone for the character from then on, in my opinion, I was like, well, that's a no-brainer. I mean, it's a great book, did well. But Axel Alonso told me one time, he said, that Hawkeye book, he said, this is kind of the vein of stuff we want to do now. He said, but that book was like getting teeth pulled to get it approved. He was like, nobody wanted to do, it was risky. He said, we'd done all these Hawkeye books that hadn't sold well. And you're like, well,
that's true.
Yeah, I mean, they weren't like, there wasn't anything interesting about them beyond, they were just, not that they were bad, but they were just.
That book definitely stood out. And I think after that is when Marvel started doing a bunch of these, could be in continuity, could be in pocket, pocket universe, and it works.
I think Wade and Somni's Daredevil and Captain America stuff was in the wake of that, and I think that was the best stuff they'd done in years in the mainstream. So I think maybe it tilted a little too far, when everything became kind of jokey and clever and cute or whatever. But I mean, I don't know. It's sometimes you feel like they just overthink so much. I don't know. I mean, but anyway, and Chris Samnee, he's another guy who's from kind of this area, and he's a guy DC didn't think could draw superheroes. I mean, I don't know. Sometimes you just you get so frustrated at what could be. And I do, like I said, I do think Jason succeeding at Marvel was one of the things that opened their eyes to the fact that they've got a talent pool, or they had when Vertigo was still going. You know, they had a talent pool of guys that they could pull from. And yeah, I don't understand how Tom King gets to do what he does, but I mean,
he does. He got the right Batman. Of course, he never really got to finish it the way that he wanted it to, but it is interesting to see these guys do their own thing.
Well, The Human Target is a great example. I mean,
yeah, well, yeah. And what was the other book he did right before that? Was it Strange? It had Adam.
He did Adam Strange. He did Adam Strange with Mitch. Adam Strange.
Yeah, was it Adam? I can't remember if it was called Adam Strange or not. But yeah, with
no. He did Mr. Miracle.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, he's doing Human Target with Greg Smallwood, who is another local guy who is
Strange Adventures. Thank you so much.
Strange Adventures, right?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
And Smallwood is another local guy who, I mean, 15 years we've been like, for a long time he was this hidden secret in Kansas City. He just kind of marched to his own drumbeat, and seeing him succeed at that level on that, I mean, I don't know what Human Target is selling, but it's a great book and it looks freaking beautiful.
Yeah, I know they took a little bit of a break between 6 and 7, so the second collection won't be out for a little while.
Well, I don't think it was intended originally to go much longer than the initial run, but
I think people expect him to do 12 issues just because of all the everything he's written in the past. But Supergirl wasn't. I don't think a Supergirl run was 12.
Yeah, I don't know.
Issues. With you doing this, can we see, since this was funded, and of course the link is in the description of the video, will we be able to see more of this universe that you and Tony have created now that you've got the JSA characters out of it? I love that origin story. It's so unusual, but it's great. It works.
Yes, definitely unusual. Yeah, I mean, we definitely want to figure out what we can do with it. Tony can't juggle 15 projects as an artist at once. I was thinking, I've got image books that I've done that are period books that part of me is like, oh, it might be kind of fun to tell a one-off story incorporating other, Hawaiian Dick or Battle Hymn or something, bridge cross two streams and see if we could do something fun, whether Tony would draw it or just design it or do covers or what have you. I mean, really, it's all kind of up in the air at this point, but we'll definitely want to revisit the universe. Because like I said, we had originally had kind of a 40-issue run planned, which leaves us with 34 issues. So
this is a really good point by Cullen. Peter Milligan was hopping around back and forth before all of them. Yeah, he was like... he did get X-Force. I was going to say he did get the...
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, the all-red X-Force.
Now, X-Men, I don't think he got what he wanted out of that. Like, that was all editorial mandate. I can assume those books are always hard to write just because of the editors and what you have to follow and things like that, different guidelines.
Well, to the point, it makes sense that you would get to have more fun with the Human Target or, Hawkeye at the time, who was kind of people now think of Hawkeye as an Avenger, part of the cinematic universe, but at the time it was just kind of a character people seemed to like but couldn't figure out what to do with. So yeah, it's much more likely you're going to get to do what you want to do with that than with the X-Men proper or Batman or what have you. And as a reader and as a creator, I'm always much more interested in those projects than the mainstream Batman, Superman stuff, just because of that.
So Clay, where can people find your work after they go and help fund this project of the Whistling Skull? What are future projects that you'll be working on? You still going to be hopping around some more? You said you had a project over at Dark Horse that you guys are doing. What else are?
Mac Chater and I actually have a couple things we're doing together. He had done a book called Briggs Land at Dark Horse for a while. He just did an issue of an Image vampire book, Bloodstained Teeth. He's a phenomenal. He's a British artist who we just really are copacetic in terms of kind of where we're coming from with stuff. We've been talking about working together for years. Strangely enough, I first heard his name back when Tony Harris and I were first doing the Whistling Skull. Tony had planned on doing a book with Mac before Mac had really gotten into comics. he was like, "Hey, I heard this guy Mac Chater. He does video game stuff. We're doing this." And I think Mac and I were already kind of talking about working together before we both flashed back and realized that connection existed back in the day. But we're doing this. This book it's scheduled to be out late summer next year. So we're going to, they're giving us a little cushion to make sure we get it done. We'd like it to be ongoing. It's a horror political thing, survivalist thing, which when it's announced, we'll give more details about. We've also got a sort of supernatural-ish kind of midnight detective thing that we're talking about doing in a series of hardcover collections, sort of
hey, now we're talking
kind of along the lines of what Sean Phillips and Brubaker do with
they're big fans of the European format, right?
Yeah. The publisher suggested that, and I think that we may follow up with that. There's many other things that are in the works that are nearing completion or announcing or whatever. But yeah, next year should see 3 or 4 new projects. For the past few years, I look back and I realize I've kind of done like one main project a year for a while. Life gets in the way. You've got other stuff going on. But the past couple of years, I've really been ramping up and trying to refocus on doing kind of what I want to do in terms of creator-owned work. I don't have a lot of plans for work for hire, but if something comes up, I'm not as active as I used to be, but my Twitter account is pretty active, and basically any social media with B. Clay Moore is, one word. You can just, Instagram, Facebook. I have a Facebook page that I try to keep updated. I never know how the algorithms work on Facebook. It seems like people don't see certain things. That's the crazy thing with social media now is I don't know who sees anything anymore because it's not like you can just put stuff out there and your audience gets it. So I used to have a newsletter that I'll probably relaunch soon, which I'll only do maybe a couple times a month just to keep people updated and preview things and share new things. I love to share behind the scenes things and art and projects that didn't go through. I mean, stuff that may get done in the future or may never get done. So it'd be nice to have a place to do that. I have a YouTube channel I haven't touched in 3 years that I plan on getting back to soon too. So people keep subscribing, but I haven't. I don't know why.
That's awesome if people keep subscribing. You haven't done anything.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, maybe I should. So I've actually got some plans for that involving other creators and stuff that hopefully will, do stuff people.
Would you do something like Alex Ross did with Fantastic Four? So what character or group would you tackle? That was a really interesting project.
So that's funny because that format is actually the format we were talking about doing this book. Specifically, that specific book was used as a reference, which I went out and picked it up. I was going to pick it up anyway, but I loved that book. By the way, I thought it was great. I love the Fantastic Four at its core. I mean, the basic idea of this family investigating strange shit. I think it gets sidetracked too often and goes in weird directions, and I think it loses something when it's not about those 4 characters. Mm-hmm. So seeing Alex do what was clearly a labor of love, and I thought it was really. I like seeing Alex Ross do more comic book work, like interiors, because he's a terrific. He can really draw. You know what I mean? I mean, it's not just the painted covers and stuff that everybody. It
is insane how talented.
Oh, yeah, and the color in that book. Me personally, I do. I have the only work for hire pet project that I am dying to do is a Black Hawk thing, which some people probably don't even remember the Black Hawk.
Black Hawk. I think the last time I saw Black Hawk, it wasn't even the original Black Hawk team, but it was the new Birds of Prey character.
Well, they had Lady Black Hawk as in Birds of Prey.
Yeah, that was part of the Black Hawk team.
Mike Costa wrote a new 52 Black Hawk book when they launched all that stuff. But one of the first things I ever discovered as a kid were torn up back issues of Black Hawks. And I love the idea of just groups of characters, Dirty Dozen, Magnificent Seven, that kind of, guys coming together on a mission.
Solid.
And there were some great Black Hawks. Howard Chaykin did a miniseries
Yep,
that I think was
that.
great. And then it was followed up by a really terrific 90s series that, they were a flying team. Yeah, they were World War II pilots. There were 7 of them from all over the world, and they operated on this island, and then they would go fight like weird. Like their most notorious enemy was the War Wheel, which was this giant metal wheel that every 5 issues or so would be depicted crushing villages and stuff. But I've always wanted to tell kind of a post-war, sort of darker, really pulpy noir Black Hawk story, which I'm never going to get to do. So I'll probably tell that story using sort of my own characters. I've got a group of characters along those lines I introduced in the 3rd Hawaiian Dick series called Screaming Black Thunder. They weren't the only aerial. I mean, there were tons of aerial heroes during World War II because people were fascinated by, fighter planes and pilots and stuff. Mm-hmm. But the Blackhawks ran from like 1939 to 1969. I mean, uninterrupted. I mean, it was a quality, and then DC picked up the rights. Then DC did a series in the 70s. They did a series in the 80s. They did another series in the 90s. And Steven Spielberg has recently basically said he's going to make a Black Hawk movie. Whether that happens or not, maybe it'll rekindle interest in kind of the concept. When that was announced, I talked to one of my DC guys I know, and I'm like, hey, I know I'm not going to get this gig, but you got to do another Black Hawk book. And if so, and of course they're like, oh yeah, pitch it, blah, blah, blah. But that's the group I would really like to do something with.
Black Hawk. Dude, you could do it just like Tom King's been doing these books.
I'm telling you, I know I could. I don't pound on Marvel or DC doors. I mean, I talk to my DC guys now and then. There's nothing I'm begging to do, but I'm always like, hey, just give me. I mean, I've pitched it before, Of course, I always pitch it in the parameters they give you, which shift. So,
yeah,
I mean, whatever I pitched 10 years ago wouldn't. But I mean, I know what I want to do. I mean, I don't know. People shy away from period. It was the battle cry was Haka. It's like every issue they'd show them all flying, and it would say Haka.
That was the battle cry. Mm-hmm. That's right. Clay, I want to thank you so much for being here, man, and taking the time to join us and talk about the project. And again, I did put a link in the description of the video where you can go and help fund this project. Yeah, and it was a lot of fun getting to know a lot of the inside information as to how publishing works pretty much everywhere around, and how the behind the scenes work, and how projects sometimes are made by just a social media message is like, hey, you want to work on the title of this book? Like, that's all he gave you. And it's Tony Harris. Like, yeah, let's do it.
And I said yes. And so, yeah. And that's the great thing about the industry, too, is one thing always leads to another. And, it's all about relationships and associations. And the industry's full of great people, too. I mean, it really is. Sometimes it doesn't seem that way, but it really is. And that extends to guys like you and, these just people who are so enthusiastic about the industry. Your YouTube channel pops up in my algorithm now and then. And, I'm always, whenever you hit on something that's a favorite of mine or whatever, I'm like, let's see if he's right about this one. But the enthusiasm is just, I don't know.
I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's necessary.
I will definitely look forward to checking out this collection. I hope to have Jordan on so he can explain a little bit of behind the scenes of Zoop. That would be awesome.
Yeah, get him on.
Again, thank you so much, Clay. And everybody go and check out the link. It's in the description of the video. And that's it, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Bye-bye. And